Catholic History Trek, a podcast exploring the Catholic past.
A dark shadow covered Europe in the 18th century, ushering in an age of great darkness, which, ironically, labeled itself as an Age of Enlightenment. It was an era which saw various anti-Catholic groups of Protestants, Masons, self-identified free thinkers, and the like, setting out to undermine the authority of the Catholic Church and the monarchies, which were still faithful to it. In a replay of the Garden of Eden, it was a humanist movement in which men stopped looking up towards God as the source of truth, but began to look downward at themselves as the source and summit of all truth. And in this age, desperate attempts were made to reason away the miraculous so that men could reallocate their faith from God to themselves and their scientific theories. But heaven did not sit idly by while men attacked the supernatural. Instead, heaven provided a miracle in stone, defying the vain reason of the day. In this episode, I'll be making a solo trek less than 160 miles away from Quito, Ecuador, home of the visions of Our Lady of Good Success mentioned in our first podcast on Marian apparitions, to the miraculous image of the Virgin of Las Lajas, which still baffles the men of science and reason today, much like it did when it first appeared. In 1754, Maria Meneses de Quinones, who lived in Colombia just across the Ecuadorian border, used to regularly trek the more than 6-mile journey between her village of Potosi and the village of Ipiales. One day, as she approached the bridge over the river Guayatara at a place called Las Lajas, meaning the flat smooth stones, a terrible storm broke out. She took refuge in a small cave next to the road. Feeling anxious and alone while waiting out the storm, she began to invoke Our Lady of the Rosary, whose patronage had become popular in the region thanks to the Dominicans. She then felt someone touch her back and call her name. She turned around but saw nothing. With great fear, Maria fled the cave and continued her journey to Potosi. Some days later, Maria returned to Ipiales, bringing on her back her daughter, Rosa, who had been deaf since birth. When they reached the cave, Maria sat down to rest on a stone. She had not finished settling in when little Rosa got off her mom's back and began to climb on the rocks of the cave, exclaiming, "Mommy, Mommy, here is a lady in white with a child in her arms." Maria was rightly frightened with terror, as it was the first time she heard her daughter speaking, and she did not see the figures described by her daughter anywhere. She exited the cave, put the girl on her back, and continued to Ipiales. Once there, she told some relatives and friends what had happened, but nobody believed her. On her homeward trip from Ipiales to Potosi, she passed the cave entrance while Rosa shouted out, "Mommy, the lady in white is calling me out." Maria could not see anything, and filled with fright, she hastened to take the child away from there. When Maria got home, she told the story to her friends about what happened. At her home, she was again met with much reluctance at her incredible story. While a few people may have been open to her story, especially since her daughter could now speak, none outright admitted that they believed her. But soon the entire region had learned of Maria's story regarding the cave, which was well known to everyone since it was next to a very busy road. Some days later, little Rosa disappeared from her home. Her mother Maria searched everywhere but could not find her. She eventually thought to search the cave, and there she found her daughter kneeling in front of the lady in white and playing in a loving and familiar way with the child, who had come down from the arms of its mother. Maria knelt before such a beautiful sight, now seeing the figures her daughter had been describing for the very first time. Maria was afraid of getting looked down upon by her relatives and neighbors, who had not believed what she had already told them. So she chose to keep quiet about what transpired in the cave. She began to frequent the cave, as Maria and her daughter Rosa would fill it with wild flowers and tallow candles when they visited. As time passed, the secret remained with Maria and Rosa until the day little Rosa fell seriously ill and died. Maria brought the girl's lifeless body to the Lady of Guayatara and reminded the Virgin of the many flowers and candles Rosa used to bring her, and asked for her intercession to bring Rosa back to life. The Holy Virgin got her divine Son to effect the miracle of resurrecting little Rosa. Filled with joy, Maria left for Ipiales. She arrived at 10 in the evening, and once there, she told all her relatives the amazing events that occurred. Those who were already asleep got up, and they rang the church bell, and a huge crowd gathered in front of the church of the village. Everyone headed to the cave, arriving at dawn. This is when an amazing image was discovered on the wall of the cave, which had never been seen by anyone previously. Neither Maria in her frequent visits to the cave, nor the locals who routinely passed the cave. The image that appeared on the rock face can be seen and visited today. It features the Holy Virgin holding the child Jesus in her left arm. With them are St. Dominic on her right and St. Francis on her left, who are both in prayer. Mary is presenting the rosary to St. Dominic, while the child Jesus offers a cord to St. Francis. The image is reminiscent of Our Lady of Guadalupe, dating back 223 years earlier, as Mary appears as a native, around probably 14 to 20 years old. She's covered in long, black hair, is wearing a blue mantle covered in stars, while standing atop a crescent moon. What makes the image of Our Lady of Las Lajas truly miraculous is the other similarity to the Guadalupe image, the inexplicable nature of its composition. The image of the Virgin of Las Lajas is not formed by paint or dye on the rocks, nor is it a surface discoloration of the rock, but rather the colors and images are the colors of the rock itself. A century ago, German scientists took core samples of the image and found that these inexplicable colors of the rock, which form the miraculous image, extend many feet deep into the solid rock wall itself. To date, nobody has been able to explain how the colors of the rock itself changed in such a way to form a beautiful image over 250 years ago, short of a miracle, of course. And another similarity to Our Lady of Guadalupe, adorers embellish the image, unable to leave the miraculous image alone. With Our Lady of Guadalupe, a crown was later painted on Mary's head, which is now barely visible. And with Our Lady of Las Lajas, metal crowns were fastened to the rock, atop the heads of the Virgin and her Divine Son. These crowns are still present. A total of 4 churches have been built at the location of the miraculous image. The first was built in 1754, the year of the apparition and resurrection of Maria's daughter Rosa. A second, larger church was begun in 1769 and completed 7 years later. In the mid-19th century, a third church was constructed at the site, which was in use until the fourth and current church was built in the early 20th century. Its spectacular Gothic design looks beautifully out of place deep in the rural Andes Mountains, perched atop the cliffs of the river Guaitara below. This church was elevated to a minor basilica in 1994. The altar for the church is placed in front of the image and topped by a marble archway framing the picture. The arch is adorned with the words Ave Gratia Plena, meaning Hail, full of grace, in Latin. There are also over 7,000 metal plates lining the route to the church, each for one of the many documented healings and miracles granted through the intercession of the Virgin of Las Lajas. Additionally, there were thousands of crutches and wheelchairs left behind by healed visitors, which were eventually moved because they grew old and rusty. And per the official site of the sanctuary, every September 16th, pilgrims flock to the sanctuary to honor the Blessed Virgin on the anniversary date of the apparition. So, this episode was a little shorter than normal, so I'll make it a 2-for-1. Staying in Colombia, we'll look at another miraculous image of the Blessed Virgin Mary. This one is the painting known as Our Lady of the Rosary of Chiquinquira. And I wanted to make sure I said that slowly, because otherwise it might sound like I'm saying chicken. It's not Our Lady of the Rosary of Chicken anything. It's Our Lady of the Rosary of Chiquinquira. So later on when I say that, I'm not saying chicken. Apparently in a previous episode I had with Kevin on the Popes versus Kings, apparently Catholic earls sounded like Catholic girls. So just clarifying, that's not Our Lady of Chicken, Our Lady of the Rosary of Chiquinquira. Anyway, I digress. In 1560s Colombia, Spanish Dominican Fray André Jadraque and Colombian colonist Don Antonio de Santana commissioned a Spanish painter, Alonso de Neves, to create a painting for the Coco Native American Indians and the colonists of Colombia. Unable to access regular painting supplies, He painted the image using pigments taken from the area's soil, mixed with herbs and flowers of the region of Colombia. And he used a rough 44-inch by 49-inch piece of material that had been weaved by the local native people for his canvas. Despite the material limitations, he created a beautiful painting. The image of Our Lady of Chiquinquira represents the Virgin wearing a white veil, a rose-colored robe, a sky-blue cape, while holding a scepter in her right hand. In her left arm, she cradles the Christ child, whom she looks upon with loving tenderness, and from her fingers dangles a large rosary. The Christ child has a small bird in his hand, which is attached to its foot with a string tied to his little thumb. And in his left hand, he also holds a large rosary. To the left of the Virgin stands St. Andrew the Apostle, while St. Anthony of Padua stands to her right. These two saints were added because they were the personal patrons of the two men who commissioned the painting. The image, commonly known as Our Lady of the Rosary among the locals, was displayed in a poorly constructed oratory or chapel. By 1577, high humidity and a leaking roof severely damaged the painting, and the natural pigments faded until the image was barely recognizable. The image was removed from the chapel and taken to the town of Chiquinquira, possibly to be repaired. The image was placed in a chapel which had become abandoned and apparently became a place for animals to live. The painting became neglected and forgotten, even being used for drying corn in the hot Colombian sun. In 1885, a Spanish immigrant and laywoman, Maria Ramos, decided to clean out the chapel and restore it. It was then that the image was rediscovered. She cleaned the deteriorated image and hung it up in the chapel, often visiting the chapel and praying before the badly damaged image. On the morning of December 26, 1586, when Maria visited the chapel, the image miraculously restored itself. The colors were suddenly restored to their original state, and the holes and tears in the old rough cloth canvas sealed themselves. Soon, the chapel became a popular pilgrimage destination, with miraculous cures attributed to it, many of which were validated by the Church. For over 3 centuries, the image was exposed to many pilgrims touching the frail cloth, as well as candle smoke, high temperatures and humidity changes, but it never deteriorated. In 1630, the Archbishop of Bogota authorized the Dominicans to take charge of the chapel, which was eventually replaced by a church, where the image remained until the present church was built in 1801. In 1910, Pope Pius X granted a canonical coronation for the image. And speaking of canonical coronations, that is a topic Kevin and I will probably need to discuss in a future episode of Catholic History Trek. In 1919, Pope Benedict XV finally carried out the canonical coronation due to the political climate in Colombia during the papacy of Pius X. In 1927, Pope Pius XI elevated the sanctuary to a minor basilica. Our Lady of Chiquinquira was named the Queen and Patroness of Colombia, and a local feast is celebrated in Ecuador and Venezuela for Our Lady of the Rosary of Chiquinquira on July 9th, the date of the coronation. In 2017, when Pope Francis visited Colombia, he requested the image be temporarily removed from the basilica so he could venerate it, and it said he had a copy of the image accompany him during his flights. Interestingly, both this painting from 1560 and the miraculous rock image of Our Lady of Las Lajas from 1754 both show the Virgin Mary as a dark-haired native holding the rosary, wearing a reddish gown, covered in a blue mantle with stars, holding the Christ child, standing on a crescent moon, and flanked by 2 saints. I hope you enjoyed this 2-for-1 episode of Catholic History Trek, and be sure to check out our many other episodes of Catholic History Trek, where I'm often joined by my co-host Kevin Schmeezing as we cover plenty of interesting topics of church history. Kevin and I typically end our podcast with the Glory Be prayed in the church's traditional language of Latin, but since this was a Marian podcast, I'd like to shake things up and end with a Marian prayer offered in Latin. This one is called the Sub Tuum. Sub tuum praesidium confugimus, sancta Dei genetrix, nostras de percussiones ne despicias in necessitatibus, sed a periculis cunctis libra nos semper, Virgo gloriosa et benedicta. Amen.
Thank you for listening to Catholic History Trek. You can reach us at catholichistorytrek@gmail.com.